This is
RedPubPod.
well, you got it. Yeah, first time out. Yeah. RedPubPod, a podcast. RedPubPod from Redhawk Publications. RedPubPod. Welcome to RedPubPod. I'm Richard Eller, and with me is my co-host Patty Thompson. We are the Redhawk Publications team, and today we have an incredible book. Earl Gulledge is our guest, and he wrote a book about Charlotte called Charlotte, Haulin Around Town Streetside 1950 to 1963. Or is that 65?
63.
63.
Yeah.
Earl, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you.
Let's get started by talking about why you wrote the book, because it's an incredible look back at what Charlotte was like before today. So, talk to us about what got you to write this book.
I have a good memory and experienced a lot of things growing up in a world that was considerably different than it is now. And my friends and I were able to be alone, move about town, do all sorts of things, and all of those are pretty indelible in my memory. And it just seemed like a good idea to document that lifestyle, which is just so terribly different than we have today. So that was pretty much the genesis.
And Charlotte in those days, I guess, would look like a small town compared to the way it is today.
Well, it was,
Although it really wasn't, because the other towns surrounding it were even smaller in those days.
Well, while it's relative, if you're a child, 8 or 9 or 10, the world was infinitely larger. And today, Charlotte, I guess in 1950 we had 134,000 people. Today, it's probably over 900.
Yeah, approaching a million, yeah.
So, that's by a factor of 6 or 7.
Right. So how'd you enjoy growing up in Charlotte? You did, right?
Yes, and everything was fun, other than worrying about polio, which was really a big thing, and which I've put in the book. We had a lot of fun, and there were not as many choices or options for things to do as, for example, I have 2 grandsons. Growing up, they had infinitely more things that they could do. So we hung together as individuals in groups, maybe more than we do today, because there were fewer choices of things to do, and you would do those things together. It was, I guess today I would say it's collegiality. We didn't know the word back then, but that's what we did.
And for our listeners out there, for some perspective, where in Charlotte did you live? Because, there's always lots of subdivisions and parts of Charlotte. Mm-hmm. Was there a neighborhood that it was referred to back then, and is it the same today?
That's a really good, incisive question. I grew up on the west side. In the 50s, Charlotte was basically east side, west side. And there was no particular demarcation, no river or anything that made that so. I grew up initially off of West Boulevard. It was sort of an extension of Wilmore. Okay. And we moved once, and then I became part of Ashley Park. Okay. Now, those neighborhoods are regenerating, and there is a surprising amount of capital going into rebuilding those neighborhoods after years of neglect due to the usual cycle that you have in cities. So they're coming back with a bang, so to speak.
Yeah, it's kind of like South Boulevard. I lived down there for a while in the 80s and 90s, and it's almost unrecognizable.
Exactly. And that's the way, I have seen older original homes that were really junky, for want of a better term, and $700,000-800,000 a couple hundred feet away in a new home that someone invested in a lot that they could buy at a favorable price. And that sort of thing is happening all around.
Now, could you talk about the pictures that you use in this? Because I think that one of the great things is you're labeling what you see in the picture and trying to put it in the context of where that would be if you went now. How tough was that process?
It was not difficult. I like accuracy. And there are a number of sources, usually online sources, although there are some very good books, but oftentimes the dates, for instance, on photos is way off. And that's why in most photos I try to ID the most recent automobile. I like accuracy. Virtually everything I remember, it became a question, I think, in some cases of let me go back and check the actual street address so that if someone is standing at 127 South Tryon and looking up and there's 504 feet of a tower, they know that something used to be there. So I was trying to put that kind of granularity in the book, which is something that you typically don't have. And I walked those streets as a child, and then later I worked uptown, and then I did work in the towers uptown.
And
so
I think
very familiar with it.
It might be interesting for our listeners to know your background. And not only are you a Charlotte native, but you're an architect. So when you think about writing this book with an architect's perspective, I can understand why you'd be so particular and so exact, because that's important just with your background in architecture. So,
as I state in the book, in the late 50s, early 60s, most of us had visions of being engineers and working in the space program. It is lost now as to what happened when Sputnik 1 went up and the shock that put into the society. So that was my original idea. I want to be an engineer and work in the space program. And it didn't exactly work that way, but I'm a licensed North Carolina architect, and I haven't practiced architecture. I worked at a firm for about 10 years, and then I went to the, shall we say, the corporate side. I worked with Barclays American and then later Duke Power, not in power production, but in the administrative, the buildings that hold people for administration purposes. And then I worked with C.B. Richard Ellis. We had a major account, Bank of America, which at one time was about 5 to 6 million square feet uptown. And we were responsible for basically all of the project and critical facilities work that happened in those buildings. So I had the good fortune of, when I was 10, walking those sidewalks, and then in the about 30 years, I should say, before I retired, being in that same environment and walking the same sidewalks. So it was. I guess it kept it all fresh in my mind.
And you saw quite a few changes to the skyline, because from the 70s through the early 2000s, Charlotte's skyline changed quite a bit with the addition of a lot of buildings.
It certainly did, and as a matter of fact, there's a photo in the book it was actually taken after the Charlottetown Mall cinemas closed. It was in the early to mid 90s, and the background, the view of the city, even in 1990, looks, I suppose, sparse is the word compared to today.
Oh yeah, it does.
So to answer your question specifically, yes, it's just remarkable.
Yeah, because if you look at that, I remember in the '70s that six-sided building that was all glass NCNB building, I think it was.
Yes, that's correct.
When you look at the skyline today, that building is just dwarfed by so many other taller buildings. You know, and I guess is that do you think that's a source of pride amongst people in one city versus another? Look at my skyline versus your skyline, kind of thing.
Well, whether anyone says it is or not, I think that it is. Charlotte's skyline has it has modernity, but you do have examples of other periods if you can see them for all of the new taller buildings.
Yeah.
So I think there's probably an unspoken competition. Charlotte, keep in mind, until the late '60s, the tallest building in Charlotte was 20 stories.
Yeah. And then it kind of starts from there. Well, the whole banking thing, I think, do you think that really had a strong effect on changing the character of Charlotte?
It certainly did, and of course, you've heard the name Hugh McCall. He was a great benefactor of the city in a number of ways. And initially, NCNB, as it was called, their tower opposite what at the time was called the Cutter Building, later Barclays, and now I think it's simply 201 South Tryon. They went up together 61, 62, but still they were, I think, the taller one. NCNB was probably 17, 18 floors. And then in the late '60s, well, early '70s, I think the first tenants went in. Our firm designed the building. The first tenants probably went in late '71, '72, and that was at the time the Jefferson First Union building. And it was 32 floors, 421 feet. And from that point on, things, sort of took off from the very early '70s. So the banks did most of that work, that creation.
Right, because outside of, what was it, Philadelphia, Charlotte was seen as a major banking hub.
Yes, and I think probably it's always been that sort of thing because of the history of first agriculture and then cotton and then finance. So yes, most of the taller buildings were bank inspired and or owned.
I'm kind of curious. I know your book does discuss quite a bit just the shifts in transportation. Back in the day, there were streetcars. And of course, today everything is personal automobile. Would you say that there's been much associated with the shift in transportation, how that impacts the downtown area of Charlotte?
The last streetcars ran in 1938. At the time and since then, there are some folks who think that there was a conspiracy to replace the streetcars by the bus companies or the bus builders, mainly General Motors. I don't subscribe to that. The lifestyles and the bus systems were sort of one and the same in most large cities. And in Charlotte, everything's more or less revolved around where you lived and if you were close to a bus route. And as I note in the book, after the Korean War, beginning in '55, you had this proliferation of automobiles. And in fact, if you follow automotive history, '55, '56, and '57 were huge years for auto enthusiasts. Had a recession in '58, but then came back in '59. And it was at that point that we saw the first of the suburban shopping centers, Park Road Shopping Center, close to South Boulevard. And if you look in the book, there is, I believe it's 1952, maybe '53, there's a Park Road bus schedule. And the buses on Saturday are running at the same frequency as buses during peak hours during the week. And the reason is because people went uptown to shop.
Yeah.
So the bus system was essential, and then ridership began to fall off after about the middle 50s because suburbanization, and obviously the buses function best when you have a dense urban environment.
And you know what I think, one of the things I think is really interesting about this book is you watch Charlotte grow up because it was a much smaller city, and maybe not proportionally, but it, to other towns, but it was much smaller than it now has become because of all that sprawl. I mean, think of that era when Charlotte Coliseum was built, Ovens Auditorium, all that commerce on Independence Boulevard, which I just remember as being like, as a kid coming from a smaller town to that was just the thing, that you just went to somewhere there and it was something that you hadn't seen before. So can you talk a little bit about what it was like to see it grow up and your feelings about it, because it became a bygone way of life the way you grew up after all of that happened. No kid coming after you could experience what you did.
That's well stated. In the 50s, my view was that everything is newer and better.
So modernity was what it was all about.
And no, to my recollection, I did not hear people talking about preservation of architecture, of anything. It was out with the old, in with the new. And that I think has changed in that we have, at least in that regard, a more mature society where people have a respect for their heritage. But what we knew was, well, gee, there's a new discount, like I think it was called Cook's, out on, it was a Clark's and a Cook's, and I think it was Cook's first. It's a new discount store. Well, let's go there. And you didn't ride the bus, you needed a car to get there. And so you witnessed this, I witnessed it, my classmates witnessed it, but I don't believe that we understood at the time what that portended for the future. Now I think back on it, and it's like, well, it was awfully nice to go uptown on a bus, do some things, and come home on a bus. And I did that even after I was of a driving age, simply because that's what people did.
And you really didn't think probably in those days about something as what eventually I guess became iconic as like the JFG coffee sign. Remember that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that
Sure.
it would even need preservation. But then that became a big thing, 90s, early 2000s when they did that?
Correct, and I believe that it is stored and preserved somewhere. I'm not certain where.
Wow.
But that is a good example of something that was iconic that you and I know about, but few other people know about that sign that was there for, I guess, decades.
Yeah. And I couldn't even tell you where it was. It seems like it was an off-ramp someplace, but to me it bespoke big city. When you've got a lit up sign that says JFG coffee, and that sort of thing.
Then you knew you were getting into Charlotte when you saw it.
Yeah.
Okay.
As a 5 or 6 year old kid,
That's
oh
funny.
wow, okay, we don't have that stuff back where I come from.
That's funny. I remember looking through the book, and there were two iconic movie theaters. I think one was called the Carolina Town or the Carolina State. One was the Carolina. And I do realize that when you go into older towns, older cities now, a lot of preservation efforts go into preserving old movie theaters. Mm-hmm. Here in small Hickory, North Carolina, we've got 2 or 3 movie theaters that are functioning either as theaters still or maybe a live theater like the Hickory Community Theater. Are there any iconic buildings that you wish they had not torn down?
The Independence Trust Company, or Independence Building at the square that was dropped with explosives, imploded, October 1981. That was a classic building at the heart of the city. If that were done today, I would like to think that some of that facade would have been salvaged, supported, and integrated into whatever the design of the new replacement would have been. That's one that it was, well, what else can you say? It's an iconic 1909 building at the center of the
Wow.
heart of the
Wow.
financial energy of North Carolina. So that was one that I would really like to have seen preserved. Another building that's long gone is the Coddington Building at Graham and West Trade Street. And it had some issues with brick falling, and make a long story short, the state had occupied the building. And then it closed. It was closed and shrouded in scaffolding for years, but now it's apartments. There are apartments there, let me put it that way.
There are a lot of apartments
Yeah.
in Charlotte these days compared to what you used to see. One of the things I really like about your book is you are, in the truest sense, a native Charlottean. You know, because Charlotte's getting what, a couple hundred people move in there every day. I mean, it's becoming a banner for people to move to. But you know where all the, metaphorically, bodies are buried in that sort of thing. Because remember in the days before, it took me a while to get this. I think it might have been a 90s thing, that North Derrida wasn't North Derrida anymore. It was Noda. You know, they gave it a nickname, and so it had that. And like Stonewall Street is not even there anymore. So trust in you when I read this thing to tell me in a way that you understand, and you're not just coming in and researching this thing and writing this book. You've lived it.
It's history by someone who was there.
Yeah, yeah.
Primary history, I believe they call
I think it is. Yeah, yeah. Which makes it a great book.
Okay, we're not saying you're old, but I'm just saying.
No, but you have the experience to know when something, when somebody comes in and they make that judgment call on, well, what was this used to be? They don't really know, but you know.
do. I know.
Yeah.
And that is why I put one chapter, chapter 4, allocated to Independence Boulevard. If you didn't live at the time, you would not have any idea what independence meant to the city. As I started off in the chapters, the road that had to be built and the one that should never have been built.
Now, can you go into a little more depth on that?
After World War II, it was obvious that with proliferation of automobiles that more highways would be needed. And cities did not have the infrastructure to support vehicles. And consider, if you will, if you're leaving Wilmington and you want to go to Gastonia or to Asheville, you came in Charlotte, you would come in Monroe Road on 74. So you need to get 7429 to come west. So what do you have to do? Well, it was cross McDowell or maybe go over to Graham Street. You had to cross through the center of the town, which was typical in most cities, and then you would get to West Moorhead and head west. And you add to that Charlotte was a huge trucking center, and also the Paul Creek tank farm on the west side of town, and it's feeding service stations and businesses, to the east of Charlotte, and all the tanker trucks had to do the same thing. So there was this huge demand, and the federal government In 1944, there was a federal highway act that made funds available, and there were certain requirements that the streets that were the recipients of those funds had to meet. And Independence was literally woven through multiple neighborhoods, destroyed a rose garden, and it impacted severely a minority community, as roads typically would do, because one of the stipulations was that such roads had to aid in slum clearance. And of course, one person's slum is another person's home. But it was an equal opportunity disruptor. It impacted Elizabeth also.
And became kind of the main artery, for a lot of Charlotte, right?
It did. And from the architectural office, I worked Colonel J. Norman Pease, a name you perhaps have heard of. We were directly across the street from Evans Auditorium. And if things aligned properly, you could get to the airport in 35 minutes and not driving fast. Of course, the commercial aspects that you spoke about earlier, further out past the Coliseum, that commercialism turned into a real nightmare because there was no way to get there unless you got on Independence Boulevard and drove with the trucks and the through-town vehicles. And eventually something had to give, and so we have Independence Expressway, which is the only remaining namesake of Independence Boulevard. You see, Independence is Wilkinson till it gets to 77, then it becomes Carson Boulevard, and then it becomes Brooklyn Village Avenue, and then it becomes Charlottetown Avenue, and only when it reaches 7th Street and the freeway truly begins, or at least going east in that routing, does it become Independence.
Okay.
And if I'm not mistaken, isn't that 16 goes into all that?
Brookshire, well, Independence ramps off Brookshire.
Well, 16 comes in, Brookshire and 16 are the same thing.
Right, yeah.
Or same road, I should say. Brookshire was the first real, I guess, circumferential expressway. It takes you just north of the Central Business District and connects you to Independence Boulevard, or now Independence Expressway.
Okay.
And that enabled, as it turns out, the tanker trucks from Paul Creek come up 85, get on Brookshire, and then get on Independence, and they're out of town.
See, that's what I love about this book.
Me too, I'm a nerd.
That you have taken all this knowledge that you have and put it in there. And you've really got two markets for this. You've got the folks who grew up with some connection to Charlotte, either a native Charlottean or one from, out of the hills that came down when it was important to buy at a Charlotte store as opposed to a local one. You've got those folks who remember some of these, but you've also got the other market of people who don't know, who come to Charlotte and don't understand why Charlotte is the way Charlotte is, and you have explained that. Was that a tough process to try to figure all that out so that you could explain it?
No, the real difficulty, if there was one, was I suspect when anyone writes, you have a mental context of the bounds of what you're going to do. And there are lots of things that you think about, but you need to have some continuity so that in this case it's a fun read and it gives you lots of information, granularity, as we say. And so what do you put in, what do you keep out? And that was, the idea was, okay, let's try to keep the ship heading to port in as straight a line as possible and not be taking tangents, so that the reader can get a lot of information. A lot of things that I may find of interest may not fit those two buckets that you're speaking about. So what I'm trying to do, or tried to do, is to keep those things so that those two groups would find value in the writing.
You can see it as, in a way, a coming of age in a city kind of book, because he's the ultimate boomer. And you were born in what, 42, 43?
45.
45.
War babies.
Yeah, so the fact is, your memories as a young boy in Charlotte, it's encompassing the 50s, which again, your book is Streetside 50 through 63. So if anyone out there wants to know what it was like, partly memoir, but partly what it's like to live in a city back in those days, it is fascinating. I do want to remind people the name of the book is Charlotte, Haulin Around Town Streetside 1950 through 1963. And where can you get this book, Richard?
You can get it through redhawkpublications.com.
There you go.
You can also, and I would figure, I don't know, do we have any copies over at Tasteful Beans, our sponsor for RedPubPod?
Oh, that's right. You know what? We will speak with Scott Owens and make sure that we do get that book in there.
But you know how towns are. Oh, that's a Charlotte book. We don't want that. But it's kind of like Hickory was in a mini way in this region. If you, like I was saying when I was a kid, if you really wanted to go and buy the school clothes for the year, you would go down to Charlotte and you would go to those stores. Hickory was better than, say, Lincolnton or Lenore or Morganton and all that, but Charlotte was the big daddy. I mean, it's through my life, and probably yours too, it's always sort of been that way. Really the capital of Western North Carolina, wouldn't you say?
I would. I think that's well put. After, for example, there was a time when the Christmas season didn't start until November, whatever, the day after Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
And that day, Charlotte was gridlocked.
Yeah.
Because people from Hickory and Statesville and Fort Mill and Monroe and Shelby and wherever would come to Charlotte. And what you just stated is so true. It's hard to imagine, but you just had the level and variety that was not available apparently elsewhere. So.
Yeah, and you got down there on a 2-lane road, because that's when 16 was still 2 lanes, and you went through all of those little towns to get there, through Denver and Lucian, all those other places, but that's what you did.
Well, you're dead on, and I suppose the one thing that the current generation would not believe is all of the 2-lane roads that we had to ride or drive on.
Yeah. And each one of them had stoplights. You go through Newton, you had to go through 5 or 6 stoplights to stay on 16 down there. And now there's a bypass. There's that whole loop, that inner and outer loop around Charlotte that. While it takes some of the personality of a town, I can see why they did it. Because people need to get around, and they need to get around fast, and they're not willing to spend half a day getting there, like they once were.
Coming up 16, I was thinking, where is the location for what we used to call Shuffletown Drag Strip?
Oh yeah.
And I don't know where it is. I can't find a place that looks like that's where it was. It was on the right side of the road heading out of town. But 16 now, it's divided as dual lanes, median, stop. There were no stoplights on 16 when we used to go to Blowing Rock, come through Hickory and stop at Mulls and have. I struck a chord there.
Yeah, you did. Yeah. Because Mulls was a big place in Eastern Hickory.
Out of curiosity, how long would it take you to get from Charlotte to Boone back in the day when there were these 2-lane roads you speak of?
What, 2.5, 3?
Yeah.
That's not bad. That's not bad.
People would freak today if it took them 3 hours to get from Charlotte to Boone.
You haven't gone up 321 behind a bus or a truck.
Yeah, 2-lane, and you're hugging the sides of those
two-lane
mountains.
321. Oh.
Yeah, because that's what it all was once upon a time. Yeah.
Wow.
Well, it's not Charlotte, but
Right, yeah.
since we're
Yeah.
there, there's an old common law rule because there were so many unpaved roads in the mountains, and I'm sure you're going to know you'll know what I say, recognize it. But if you were on a gravelled mountain road and it was narrow and you met another car, the car on the inside of a curve would always pull over and stop so that the car on the outside would not have any interference and could get by because the roads were narrow. And I remember being in vehicles and so many times having to do that. Now that may sound dark ages, but
That's the way it was once upon a time. Yeah.
there were a lot of gravelled, what we call secondary roads that were not paved, certainly in the western areas.
Yeah, Hickory had a bunch of those that were unpaved out through Viewmont. Large sections of that on your way to Alexander County wasn't for a long time until you get to late 50s, early 60s. Yeah.
It's just hard to have a paradigm where you can accept that that's the way things were.
Yeah.
One question I'd like to ask is just, I always like to talk about the writing process. Earl, when this book came to us, it was done. I mean, how infrequent do we get a book that comes in somewhat perfectly edited and well done? And you did. So I'm kind of curious, how long did it take you to write this, and what was the editing process? Did someone else edit it? It
No.
kind of came in ready to go, sir.
Would that other authors were like you? That all authors.
Well, firstly, if I'm going to submit something, it needs to be competent and ready. The inspiration was in July 2019 because, as I noted in the book, I was at a function in a tower downtown and looked at an old railroad right-of-way and was talking with our host. And as things happen, you say, well, what used to be there? And you start a conversation. Or if people know you're from Charlotte and they're somewhere else, they will ask you questions. And I came home and I said, I think I need to write all of this down. And so I started doing that. Now, obviously, COVID interrupted in part because, as you know, I'm an adjunct instructor, and then we had issues during COVID of, having to do remote and so forth. And so it was not until about 2022 that I got back to it. And then in 2023, I decided, okay, I need to finish this. And so from then until, I suppose, May of 2025, I worked on it. But the last year and a half was, pretty much whenever I get a chance, I'll do something. So to answer your question, it took longer than you might think, but if I had been working without interruption of COVID and so forth, I probably would have spent 2 or 3 years.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. And did you have an editor look this over? Oh.
No.
Oh.
I have some close friends who,
Wow.
several, I just gave them a Word document to take a look at this, tell me if you would find it of interest. But, I wrote it.
Okay. Exceptional writer.
Yeah, really. Yeah. And it's flying off the shelves, is it not?
I know. It's been. I can tell people are buying this probably for holiday gifts, because people are buying 5 and 6 copies of it. You're hitting a chord with the right people at the right time. So,
Well, I
thank
appreciate
you.
getting this to market in time. The timing is very good. There's no question about that. But I do think there's information in the book, lots of it, that needs to be documented. And I've tried to be as accurate as possible.
Well, congratulations.
Well, thank you very much.
On a new South town that tends to, and you alluded to this earlier, out with the old and in with the new, for a book that documents just where Charlotte came from, I think is very important to its story. And one day, and it seems like today's that day, it'll be recognized and appreciated for all the information that you've preserved.
Well, that was the objective.
Okay.
Let's get this down.
But it does suggest that if people are enjoying this much, those tangents you were talking about, it could be a good second book, you know? If you wanted to get to work on that now.
You got 2 or 3 more years. You can work on this. Thank you, Earl. This means a lot
Yes,
to
thank
you
you.
for coming
This
up
is
today.
delightful. I'm glad to be here. I appreciate the opportunity.
Well, we certainly appreciate you taking the time, and more importantly, for writing the book. The book is called Charlotte, Haulin Around Town Streetside, 1950 to 1963.
And we look forward to you purchasing it at RedHawkPublications.com. I think Earl has one more thing to do, right?
He does, yes.
Okay.
We the name of our podcast is RedPubPod, which is a bit of a tongue twister, but we want to see if you can say that.
RedPubPod.
Well, you got
course
it.
he can.
Yeah, first time out. Yeah. Well, thank you for joining us on RedPubPod. We appreciate you being here. We've got plenty more episodes because we're hitting right around 50, I think.
Pretty soon. Pretty soon.
Yeah, we're getting there. So we're halfway on our way to 100. Check us out, and we thank you for being here. We'll talk to you next time.
Thank you. RedPubPod.
RedPubPod. This is
RedPubPod.
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 RedPubPod. A podcast
RedPubPod.
from Redhawk Publications.
RedPubPod. RedPubPod.
Oh, you got
course he
it.
can.
Yeah, first time out. Yeah.